Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you for a second time this week. Happy Friday. Hope you have some great weekend plans. I have really great weekend plans in that I have no plans, very few plans, few things, of course, that need to be done around the house, etc., but no plans in that we're not going anywhere. We don't have anything major going on, so I'm just going to lay low. We're still organizing the new place, so getting those things taken care of. The always exciting plan of laundry, so try not to be jealous of that. I know that's always very exciting, but yeah, so I hope that your weekend is looking like or shaping up to be exactly what you want it to be. We, of course, have another author interview today. That author is with Cathy A. Lewis, and it is about, it's historical fiction, but it is based on an actual experience of her father's. The book is called The Road We Took, 4 Days in Germany, 1933. Let me go ahead and give you the description of that book. In 1933, before World War II and the Holocaust, the world was unaware of Hitler's evil plans to exterminate millions. Author Cathy A. Lewis discovered a tattered leather suitcase containing her deceased father's journal documenting his 6-week trek through Europe in 1933, while traveling to the 4th Boy Scout World Jamboree held in Godolo, Hungary. The journey after the Jamboree took Lewis's father and his troop through Nazi Germany on their way to the port at Bremen. The quest didn't end with the Jamboree. In reality, it had just begun. Inspired by her father's historical recount and stories shared with her during her youth, The Road We Took, 4 Days in Germany, 1933, is the epic tale of an American Boy Scout who discovers by coincidence 4 desperate Jewish citizens attempting to escape Nazi Germany. Fascinating characters come together in a narrative of extreme courage, budding adolescent love, and their fight for survival in this gripping novel. Life in Germany would never be the same as Hitler and the Nazis advanced their propaganda campaign to systemically murder the Jewish population and anyone that does not fit their Aryan ideals. And this was only the beginning. So that is the description of The Road We Took, 4 Days in Germany, 1933. Cathy also sent me an email after we spoke and said that she didn't feel like she had described the book to her best advantage when she describes the book. Of course, that's coming up. You haven't heard that yet. But she sent me an email, and I wanted to share with you what else she added. So you can have that in your head as then she's talking about her book in a few minutes. So let me go ahead and read what she wanted to add to her description of the book. She writes, there is young love, intrigue, heartbreak, hope, escape, radicalism, and many other themes that tie the whole story together. It's a nail-biting, fast-paced roller coaster ride through the 4 days in Germany. There is little time for each of the characters before something catastrophic occurs. And yeah, that's actually a very good description of it. It's fast-paced. Things happen, boom, boom, boom. You start off with this bus full of American Boy Scouts returning through Germany to meet the boat that will take them back to America. And right within the first chapter, something happens. They have a German friend that they met at the Jamboree, and I'm not going to tell you, but something happens to him that makes them more aware of what is going on in Germany. Then they are witness to a rally at which Hitler spoke, where they saw the Hitler Youth, and they just start becoming more and more aware. And then we're introduced to other characters who are caught up in what's going on with Jews being arrested, people who are suspected of being communists being arrested, any excuse to arrest people who are considered to be other or inappropriate in the eyes of the Nazi regime, etc. And so, let's go ahead and turn now to the interview so Cathy can tell you more about the story, more about how it came into being, and why she chose to write it the way she did. So again, the book is called 4 Days in Germany. The Road We Took, 4 Days in Germany, 1933. The author, again, is Cathy A. Lewis.
Sarah, so nice to be with you today. Thank you.
I am very happy to have you here to talk about your historic fiction, The Road We Took, 4 Days in Germany, 1933. But before we get to the book, I would love if you could share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit.
That sounds great. Well, I am a classically trained chef. I've been cooking professionally for 43 years. I was trained at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park and became a chef way before it was cool to be a chef. Nowadays, it's the profession is highly esteemed. And when I came up in the world of food, it was not as highly esteemed. I was a bit of a trendsetter for my time period, because even in my class, there were only a couple of women also training out of a class of about, I think we had like 70 people in our total class. So back in the 80s, there were not a lot of female executive chefs. So it was a very difficult field. You had to really love what you were doing to stay in it, because the physical demands and the nature of the business, stressful nature of it itself, really, really takes a toll on you. So you've got to love it to be in it for that length of time. And I'm either crazy or I just love it so much, because even today, I still work as a chef and I totally enjoy cooking. The joy has never left me. So I'm really grateful for that, to have a career this long and still love what I do.
Yeah. In fact, before we started recording, I was saying that we could have a whole episode just me asking you a lot of really nosy questions about what being a professional chef is. And especially just, what you were talking about with not that many women in the program and coming up at a different time. Now we've got Food Network and the Food Channel and everything else where everybody watches women chefs.
Absolutely.
And so I can only imagine that it was a lot more difficult as you were training.
It really was. And nowadays, and it's great. I would say that the Food Network was the icebreaker as far as elevating the position of a chef, much more so than any other time really in history, outside of maybe Europe in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where gastronomy was everything, and especially during the Roaring '20s and everything, all of the bastions of gastronomy in France and even in England. That was a really, really big deal. Think of Auguste Escoffier and some of these chefs that did a lot to kind of standardize what is classical cuisine. And even though classical cuisine is not avant-garde or the thing of today, it's the technique and the skill of those practices that you still see being employed in kitchens today, because they're kind of the rudimentary, fundamental aspects of cause and effect of cooking. If you do this, this will happen. And so cooking became kind of standardized because of the French, actually. And the Italians would pipe up and say yes, but it was Catherine de Medici that brought her Italian chefs when she married Louis the 16th, and they were the ones that really were the start of classical cuisine. And so, there's a big debate there that could go on about that, and how our interest grew over the years. And as more people travel, and more people have diverse interests. I think cooking is just, kind of a thing today where, there's a lot of people that may call themselves chefs, but 10 dishes does not a chef make. And the training that goes into to really be able to call yourself a chef. I wrote a blog about it on my website called I Am Chef, and how there's this kind of metamorphosis that transforms you, that the minute you pick up an apron or a knife, it's like you just become chef, and it's just like you just morph into this like different sort of personality, almost, to say that it's been quite shocking when my family is around and they want to cook with me. They're like, don't be so bossy. And I'm like, I'm chef. I can't help it. This is just, if you're not doing something right, I'm going to say it. So
right. And isn't their standard response supposed to be something along the lines of, yes, chef?
Yes, exactly. That's it. That's exactly right. Yes, chef. So my nephew, who's a chef, totally gets it. He really does. He's amazing. And it's so nice to see another generation in my family embracing this time-honored craft.
Now, let me just start up that. I feel like I should have some really good segue or metaphor or something between being a chef, cooking, and an author and writing a novel. I'm sure there's something in there somewhere. I've got nothing, so we're just gonna move to the book. It is a process of creation.
You're so right, because I employ almost the same procedures that I do in cooking to writing, and it's these two things are completely diametrically opposed as far as like what you would think a skill set would be, but I do the same applications as far as if I'm going to write, so I do research. If I'm going to create a recipe, I do research, and then I source the ingredients, or I write an outline, and then I create the dish, and then I create the chapter. So there's a lot of crossover there in the skill set, where I kind of apply the same principles that I would with creating a recipe to creating a chapter.
Okay, I love it. It's time for our first break of the podcast, but I really do like that analogy of creating a chapter, creating a recipe. I neither write books nor recipes, but I do love to bake, and I love to cook, not quite as extensively or as well as my husband does. I love to bake more than I love to cook, but that idea of crafting a recipe, crafting a chapter, and then the people reading the recipe and reading the chapter and seeing how they're put together and how all those pieces come together to create this final product. I think that's really cool. Anyway, let's go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking more about this book, 4 Days in Germany. Excuse me, I keep saying that. The Road We Took, 4 Days in Germany, 1933. I apologize that I've missaid that twice now. But we'll be talking more about this book and how it came into existence. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Cathy A. Lewis. We are talking about historical fiction based on her father's actual experiences. Again, the book is called The Road We Took, 4 Days in Germany, 1933. Let's continue with that interview. The book itself is called The Road We Took. Again, 4 Days in Germany, 1933. Can you give an overview of the story itself?
I can. So I have to give you a little background first. My dad was a Boy Scout, and in 1933, they had the World Jamboree, which meant I think it was 46 or 47 different countries would all meet at a location, and the location was Godolo, Hungary. And they would camp for 2 weeks in the Royal Forest at the castle that was at Godolo, where the monarchy lived back in the day. And so after the Jamboree, my dad's troop spent 4 days traveling through Germany on the way to Bremen to take the ship back to the United States. While they were in Germany, they witnessed things that were of incredible historic nature and value, and saw things that that the rest of the world really wasn't aware was going on at the time. And so that's kind of the background. I had a suitcase in my possession since my dad died in 1995, and the suitcase had all of my dad's artifacts and mementos and little treasures and everything, photographs from his 6-week in total 6-week trip through Europe. But what I didn't know was in there was his journal. And so in 2018, I had to have a pretty major surgery, reconstruction surgery done in my ankle, which meant I couldn't work or walk basically for about 6 months. So I needed a really creative project to keep me busy while I recovered. And I thought, this is a good time to go through that journal. And I started reading through my dad's journal and thought, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable, because the personal and perspective of a 16-year-old, he was almost 17, but he wrote about what he saw, what he felt, what his impressions were of the things that he saw going through Germany. And there was one point in the book where he talks about meeting a young Hitler youth who had been a Boy Scout. But Hitler had put forth a decree that no Austrian or German boys would attend the World Jamboree, and it was compulsory to join the Hitler Youth. And so this boy was lamenting to my dad how disappointed he was that he couldn't go to the Jamboree. And they talked for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so. And that night, my dad went back to write in his journal, and he wrote about this boy that he found him to be a fine fellow. And it was those 8 words that was the impetus for my book, because what my dad didn't know is 10 years later down the road, he would marry a Jewish woman, an immigrant whose extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, were all murdered by the Nazis. And so when I read that, I found him to be a fine fellow. That was kind of my seminal moment where I was like, okay, I've got to write about this. And my cousin, in fact, I told her all about the journal and what I had found. And she was just, the verdict was out. You have to write about this. You just have to. And so for a couple of weeks, she just would call me and ask me, are you writing? Have you started the book? Have you started an outline? Are you writing about it? And so she really kept on me to write about it. And it was important. And it really kind of underscored my own feelings that, just the painful lesson of what happens when hatred can rise up and destroy so much in such a little period of time, and how, we see this happening now with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and just how we have to always be, harbingers for good in putting out, the truth about these things that have happened in the past, but also warn people that, hey, you can't let these things continue and go on and fester, because nations get destroyed, people get destroyed by these kinds of actions of others. And so that was really something that was important to me to write about, because my dad wrote about witnessing 40,000 Hitler Youth at this huge meeting at Nuremberg, and they weren't allowed to go and watch or listen or anything, but he saw that. And while they were in Munich, he saw a gigantic Hitler rally of like thousands and thousands of troops and tanks and trucks and armaments and all these things that were in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. And what the rest of the world didn't know at the time was that since the late 1920s, Hitler had already been working with Russia very covertly to rebuild their military. And so my dad witnessed all these aspects of history, and I just found it just fascinating, but also compelling that, it was just something that I had to be able to write about and share. And so the book, long story short, is about his journey with some fiction mixed in, because you have to make it an interesting story. And as a novice writer, one of the first things my developmental editor told me was, it's about turning the page. You want to create a story arc and turn the page. So I'm learning all of these, new terms and a whole new skill set when it comes to writing something fiction, because I thought writing historical fiction, I'd be giving, mostly like dates and information and making compelling arguments and all that. And that's not the case. It's more about you're crafting a story and telling a story. So I tell a couple of different stories in the book that all have a way of meshing together in a kind of amazing way towards the end of the book. So it details 4 days in Germany and my dad's journey through Germany on his way to Bremen.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about those four perspectives? Why you chose to write from multiple perspectives, and how you chose the perspectives from which to write?
The perspectives I chose from which to write, I'll answer that first, because my mom came here to the United States after marrying my dad in the Canal Zone. Her family had come from Baranovich, Poland. Her mother and father had basically escaped at the end of World War I. Came to Argentina because they had some relatives living there. They got married. My mom was born in Argentina. They traveled through South America during her childhood, and she ended up in Panama when she was 18, looking for a job on the Army base. So she got a job on the Army base, met my dad there, and married him. He was from Rochester, New York, and came to the United States, immigrated in 1944, which at the time it was a very anti-Semitic time in the United States. And my dad's family was appalled that my dad, who was kind of the golden boy of this waspy kind of family, they were appalled that he would marry not only a foreigner, but a Jewish woman, because they were not Jewish. And so a lot of the perspective I write from is from the things that my mom shared with me, stories my mom told me, the things that she faced growing up, and those stories play out through my characters. And so the characters' perspective, you have a Polish girl who is an orphan but a brilliant musician. You have a German boy who finds out later in life that he's Jewish. You have a Jewish woman who is also Polish but living in Germany, but comes face to face with a rabid Nazi supporter, expecting her to become a Nazi supporter too, not knowing that she's Jewish. And so these are the kind of perspectives of the characters that they bring their worldview to the story. And so you learn about, even though this book essentially takes place over 4 days, with one character looking back in time to 1925, you're basically living the these 4 days with the characters, and you get to know them and get to know about what they think and what they believe and what their worldview had been up until this point where they all come together. And so it's it's kind of a conglomeration wouldn't be a good word to use, but it's sort of they all go through this sort of metamorphosis transformation during this period of time, and how their views change based on their relationships.
So were you raised Jewish then, because your mother is Jewish?
I was not raised Jewish. Actually, I didn't even know I was Jewish until I was somewhere between like 8 and 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea. My parents had decided, because my mom had faced so much anti-Semitism, she wanted to protect her children, my brother, my sister, and I. I found out because my brother went to Mexico. My mom's family had moved from South America and settled. This was after my mom had left and gotten married. My mom's remaining brothers and sister and parents all moved to Mexico City. And my brother went to visit when he was, I think, 13 or 14 years old, and came back and said, we're Jewish. And I was like, what's Jewish? I mean, I had no clue, no idea at all. So it was nothing. There were a lot of things my mom did not like to talk about, and she did not like to talk about World War II or her family, and which is the case with a lot of people, I would say, that grew up during that time period. Very painful for some, having lost, all their family members, like my mom's family did. And so she would never talk about it. And unfortunately, all of these revelations for me later in life came after my parents passed, because they've both been gone for a very long time, way over 20 years. So I was never able to ask them any of these questions. And there's no one left alive in my mom's family that could ever answer any of these questions. So finding that journal kind of gave me a huge paradigm shift in my life as far as my direction, what I want to do, the whole world of writing opening up to me when I wrote this book. I mean, if you told me 10 years ago I was going to write a book about, I would have laughed. I would have thought, no, chefs don't use writing skills. Our writing skills consist of writing recipes and menus. I did not have great writing skills at all. And so I had to kind of go back to school and relearn grammar and, the 8 parts of a sentence and all of these aspects of writing.
Time for the second break of the podcast. When we come back, Cathy is going to be talking a little bit more about not being raised Jewish and the decisions behind that, more of her mother's experiences. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with Cathy A. Lewis. Before the break, we were talking about whether or not she was raised Jewish, and she's going to talk a little bit more about that. She's going to give more of an answer to that question.
So no, I wasn't raised Jewish at all. And But later in life, when I asked my mom why, and she said because they wanted to protect us. Our parents just felt like they didn't want us to suffer, have to go through any of the things that she went through. Although my brother did in high school suffer a lot of anti-Semitic treatment, unfortunately, from certain people in his high school class that beat him up and called him a dirty Jew, and those kinds of things. Really painful things for him.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Again, so many questions, but I'll try to keep to the book. In addition to your father's journal, then I imagine you did a lot of research. Can you talk a little bit about the research process for the book?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So before I even started to write, I did 2.5, 3 months of research, just reading as much as I could about the prior to 1933. Like, where did the Nazi Party come from? When did Hitler enter into it? How did he conceive this master plan of, wanting to murder all Jews and anyone that didn't fit this Aryan profile? So I researched using. There's so many wonderful Jewish sources available to use, like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Library, Yad Vashem in Israel. All these centers for advanced Holocaust studies. There's a wealth of information out there. And so I just Googled to my heart's content, and just, because physically I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go down the street to the library or anything like that, because I wasn't walking. All my research was done online and through books that I had, and that I was already in possession of, and from just those sources, I was able to really gather enough information for me to feel like, okay, I can sit down now and talk intelligently about this subject, because now I know the information, and how everything started with Hitler and how he was involved in the Nazi Party, back in the 1920s, and the beer hall putsch in Munich, and when he was put in prison, and most people don't know that Rudolf Hess was his cellmate while he was in prison for his part in the beer hall putsch in 1923 in Munich. And Hitler dictated to Hess Mein Kampf. And so he already had his number one henchman on board with their devious, horrible plan to exterminate the Jews. And so that was really my starting point. Was as soon as I had that much information, I felt like I could start to plug it into parts in the story where it would be appropriate and to talk about the history. I actually wanted to put in a lot more facts and information, but my developmental editor said, this can't be a book about facts. You're not writing a history book, okay? This is historical fiction.
Yeah.
Stay on point.
Yeah. I was just having this conversation on a previous interview a couple weeks ago where I would want to include all of my research, but this is so interesting. I have to put it in.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, because you're like, you're fascinated by it. You're thinking everybody else is going to be fascinated by it too. Like, oh my goodness, there's all of this information. And I'm a little bit of a numbers geek. I do love numbers and anything with tables and mathematics and things like that. And so I was ready to put all this information in here. And my editor said, absolutely not. Get rid of all that. So my first version of the book was actually 210,000 words. And my developmental editor said, no one knows you. You've never written before. You're a first-time author. You're never going to get this book published. So start over and cut it down 100,000 words.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was brutal. She was really brutal, but you know what? Honestly, it's what I needed. I needed somebody that was a little bit of a taskmaster, because I could go off in 12 20 different directions at once. And she really reined me in and like kept me on course, which was needed. And so I wrote 80,000 new words, and then my computer crashed and it was wiped clean. I lost everything.
No.
Everything. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Ouch.
And yeah, it was painful. I was using track changes for, the Word program, which is part of Microsoft Works, but it was designed for Apple products. And so there were some glitches, and I apparently found some glitch, and it just like whoosh, wiped clean the memory and everything. So I had to go to bed that day and pulled the covers over my head and said, goodbye, cruel world. And then woke up the next day and said, okay, let's start again. And I think this version is the version I was meant to write. I feel pretty sure about that.
Well,
so
I mean,
it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, at least having written twice before, you knew where to start and a little bit of where you were going. So you weren't starting from scratch. But wow. How was it writing your dad as a fictionalized character?
That was, that was wonderful. And I really enjoyed it so much because as I was reading his journal, I could hear his voice speaking the words. And it's like I brought him to life. And things that he had told me about himself when he was that age, and on the Jamboree, and the things that he thought and saw, and just like his very naive worldview at the time. He had led a very sheltered life, but when they went on this 6-week trek, the world at the time was at the pinnacle of the Depression. And it kind of blew me away that my dad's parents sent him with $50 in his pocket in 1933, with 3 more brothers and sisters at home. And the fact that they sent him and let him go on this trip, it still blows me away. And I wish I could have asked him these questions while he was still alive. Like, was that a really big sacrifice for your parents to send you? And it must have been. But he went with 18 other boys from his scout troop. So recreating my dad at age 16 was really fun. It really was, because all of my dad's goodness and sweet personality and gentle side, but also his temper, I was able to recreate through the character Buster. And so it was really fun. And Buster's father in the book is named Raymond, which is really my dad's first name. His nickname as a child was Buster, but his real name was Raymond. And I got to infuse a little bit of my older dad into the character of Raymond. So actually, my dad is his younger self and is kind of his older self in the book.
That's really cool. How about some of the other characters? What was your character development like? Did you have them pretty well fleshed out before you started writing, or did they evolve as you wrote?
They absolutely evolved as I wrote, because I had kind of a game plan written out. It's funny, when I'm doing a wine dinner, or I'm going to execute some big event or something, I have a notebook of all my plans of prep lists and who's doing what. And I applied the same thing to the worksheet, if you will, of my book sketched out, where this character, who they intersect with, and what's their relationship, and how do they interact, and what happens. And I found out that as I kept writing, a lot of those things switched around during the story, because I didn't have a firm format for the book sketched out. I just sit down and start to write, and these stories just kind of pop into my head as I go. And so a lot of the stories in the book and characters were just created through my own imagination.
this is your first novel, and kind of came at it. Well, your cousin kind of made you do it.
She did. Well, she just said, this is really important. You found this time capsule that talks about a particular time in history. And you need to write about it, because most people, when you talk to them about Hitler and the reign of Hitler, they think, oh, invasion of Poland, 1939. Oh, no.
Mm-hmm.
From January 30th, 1933, when he became chancellor, that plan was in place and ready to go. I mean, look how quickly he took hold of Germany. And von Hindenburg was the president at the time, and he coincidentally became ill and died rather quickly. That's another story that needs to be investigated, I think, because I wouldn't doubt there was a hand in that. I mean, that's never been really thoroughly investigated. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But it was really important for the sake of future generations, and that I hope will read my book, that they will understand just how ruthless this Nazi regime was, and that the end game to exterminate all Jews and anyone that didn't fit their Aryan ideals, that lesson is never forgotten, and that we don't forget how quickly hatred can spring up and just destroy so much in such a short period of time. Just the number of people that died during World War II, civilians, and not to mention troops from many nations, and just how you just think of the damage that was. It's mind-boggling when you think about the things that men are able to create and destroy with weapons.
That you came to writing this story from a very particular perspective, finding your father's journal and then being encouraged by your cousin. Do you want to keep writing? Is it something that, are you working on anything now?
I am actually. A number of people, almost everyone that read the book, said, what happens to these people now? You can't just leave us hanging. You've got to tell us what happens to these characters. And so I thought, okay, I've kind of found my own little niche in writing, which is I am a lover of history. I love the period of the 30s and the 40s, and I feel like I want to continue to write books based on historical events that happened and kind of breathe new life into them by, even though it's fiction, but based on a true story and telling of these historical events. And so the next historical event that I'm writing about, the book is going to be called Some by Ship. And it's about the voyage of the SS St. Louis that left Hamburg, Germany in May of 1939 with the intention of going to port in Cuba, where the ship was turned away. There were 937 German Jews aboard. The whole thing was set up by Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, as a ruse to show the world, see, we're good to these German Jews. We're letting them leave. We're not keeping them here against their will. But what he also did was, a month before the ship left, set a whole bunch of Nazis to Cuba, to Havana, to stir up all kinds of anti-Semitism and to create this whole issue. Like, you don't want the people on the ship that are coming are the worst. They're robbers and murderers, and you don't want them coming. So you need to reject the ship and don't allow this ship to port. And so there was that aspect. And then there was a whole big political thing going on behind the scenes too. A money-making scheme by a couple of people, taking the money of these German Jews, saying that they had, they would be able to temporarily stay in Havana until their paperwork was done and they could immigrate to the United States. I have cousins that came over to the United States that way, from going to Cuba first and then immigrating to the United States. But my next story is going to be built around that story of the fated voyage of the SS St. Louis, 1939.
Time for the final break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be finding out the answer as to whether the characters of this book are going to appear in the book that Cathy was just speaking about. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Cathy A. Lewis. But you mentioned that people have talked about wanting to hear more about the characters in this book. Will they make any appearances?
They sure will. The whole story is going to revolve around them again.
Okay.
And at first I had a little bit of conflict thinking, yeah, but these are like imaginary characters that some of these, are just like, so it's like, okay, yeah. So keep writing.
Right. You can make them do what you want them to do. That's
right. Exactly. I love it.
But then what about the character that's based on your dad? Will that evolve away from your dad's story, or is he also in this book?
He is still in this book, and it will evolve a little bit away from his story and his life. But I decided I would create my dad's character based around a life that he wished he had that he didn't get to live. My dad really desired to. He graduated with a minor in music from the Eastman School of Music, and he was an English major at the University of Rochester. And my dad really wanted to be an English teacher. He really wanted to teach literature, but he had too much pressure from his family to go into the family insurance business. And my dad lived a life doing what he really didn't want to do. He liked it because he felt like he was making a difference in people's lives and helping them by, selling life insurance and those kinds of things. But he lived a very unfulfilled life. So I am giving my dad an opportunity at a fulfilled life in my book.
I love it. That's wonderful. It's a really nice legacy and way of honoring him.
Absolutely.
Do you have advice for aspiring authors? Because you came to writing in a slightly different way than a lot of people I talk to.
I really did. And later in life, too, because I'm going to be 65 in October. So it was a little late in life to take on a new career. But as I researched, there's so many well-known great authors that started their career late in life. So my advice to aspiring authors is don't give up no matter what. Don't give up. Save everything you write. Even if you don't finish a story, save it because you might be able to use it in the future. Any creative endeavor like that is going to go through many changes, and it's just great to keep those ideas, keep an idea book of things that you like to write about or things that you might like to write about. And this is kind of something I've always done, because even though I started writing later in life, I always wanted to write, but honestly, I never thought I was qualified to write. I still don't feel like I'm qualified to write to some extent, because sure. I didn't go to school. My education wasn't based in any of those fields at all, of, taking English or learning literature or creative writing or any of those things. I never had any of that in my background. So I would encourage aspiring writers to keep a book of things you want to write about and your idea book, and keep everything that you write, because you might be able to use it in the future. And don't quit. Just keep going. It's a very solitary practice, writing. And it's, you're creating your own world, basically. So enjoy it and get into the journey of it, and create your own space and your own environment where you like to write, and make your atmosphere around you conducive to that creative experience, whatever that looks like or means to you. Like, oftentimes I like to sit at my kitchen table, because I look outside, I see the birds on the bird feeder, I can see my flowers and my herbs and the trees, and see what's happening in the weather. And for me, that's just pretty simpatico with writing for me. I really enjoy that. Plus it's in the kitchen, so I feel very comfortable and at home there.
Yep, you're in your space, your element.
I'm in my element, absolutely. Yeah. And I would just encourage anybody that it's never too late to begin something new and to start a new journey.
Wonderful. So when you take time to read for yourself, do you have favorite authors, genres? Do you read cookbooks?
I collect cookbooks more than I read them, probably like most of the people that have cookbook collections. But I have a pretty big cookbook collection, actually. I think I've got about maybe 400 cookbooks. But a lot of them are old, out of print, things like that I collect just for the sake of collecting, and I peruse them and look through them. I don't necessarily cook from them all, but they're a great source if I'm looking for ideas. And so I do that a little bit, but my favorite genres would probably be World War II, historical things. Michael O.J., The English Patient. I'm trying to think of books I've loved, like Ken Follett, Eye of the Needle, Anthony Doerr, The Light We Cannot See. Another great book I read, and I can't say that I have favorite authors. if something about a book catches my attention, I just read it. I do enjoy, though, as a genre, historical fiction, anything that has to do really with World War I and World War II, but World War II specifically, I guess.
Mm-hmm. All right. So in terms of internet presence, if you can share website or social media that you are active on, where people can find you and learn more about you.
Absolutely. So my website is www.cathyaLewis, all in one word, .com. And on there, you'll find my blog. I write once or twice a month about whatever it is that hits me at the moment. I write about. I write recipes sometimes and talk about food. I've got lots of food photography pictures on there of I live in Nashville, so yes, there's lots of celebrities here that I've cooked for, lived with, traveled with, things like that. So I've got photographs, and as far as social media presence, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and those links are all on my webpage.
Thank you. So Cathy, we've talked about the book, and we've talked about how it came to be. We've talked about a variety of different things, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to bring up or highlight at this point?
Well, I do want to say that my little book received a notification that I was a finalist in the International Book Awards for 2022, which
Wonderful.
was pretty cool because I'm a little independent, self-published author here, and so to your audience, if you have a great story to tell, really the sky's the limit. You just don't know what kind of good things can happen as a result of you writing a book. I mean, never in a million years did I think I would be a finalist for an award for this book. I mean, I love my book. I wrote it. I love it. I think it's a great story. It's a page turner for sure. You get very wrapped up in the characters and the story, but I didn't know I would qualify for an award. And also, of an important note, the book was entered into the Judica division of Harvard University Library, of the Widener Library there, and it's now, in fact, part of the collection there. And so that was a huge honor for me. So my sister did great promotional work for me and told one of her customers at a store where she works all about the book. The person she was talking to happened to be the book cataloger at the Widener Library at Harvard University. And so my sister told her about the book, asked her if she'd like a book. We got her a copy, and the woman's name is Hadassah. Hadassah entered it into the Judica division at Harvard. So thank you to my sister for being my good PR person in Boston. And then also I did had a great book review with this guy, Jordan Rich, with WMZ Boston, to let a lot of people in that Boston area know about the book.
Wonderful. Well, all of that is great. Congratulations. And your sister definitely deserves, I don't know, chocolate or wine or something.
Oh, believe me, she's coming here at the end of the July for a week. She'll get spoiled rotten.
Perfect. I love it.
It's great having a big sister that you can do things like that for.
I agree. Well, Cathy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about the book and your father and just so many different subjects and cooking. I mean, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure talking with you as well.
Thank you once again to Cathy for joining me to talk about this book. If you're a fan of historical fiction, if you're a fan of World War II historical fiction, which we've had a lot of really great authors on this podcast who write World War II historical fiction, you should definitely check out this book. I love the added element that it is based on her father's travels in Germany at this time. We often think of World War II as, closer to the end of the 30s into the mid 40s, of course, when the bulk of the war was going on. We don't often think about everything that led up to that point. And 1933 to 1938, there was a lot going on. And the fact that her father, who was only there for 4 days, but still witnessed some pretty incredible precursors to what became the Second World War, I find fascinating, and just the finding those journals would be amazing. I know I'm projecting here, but I so would have wished that I had found them before my father died, or, that Cathy had found them before her father died, and think of the conversations that may or may not have happened around that. Although I think about talking to my own dad, and he was, I love that man so much, but he was not the great answerer of questions. So probably, he never would have written in a journal. And I've tried to ask him about his time in the Navy, but I'm just picturing myself saying, wow, Dad, I found this journal and I'm reading through it. What were your experiences? Do you want to tell me more? And he would have just said, yeah, no, they were interesting, or something along those lines. So, but at any rate, I'm just saying that it's too bad that Cathy didn't find the journal earlier, or maybe that there could have been more conversations. But since there weren't, I really love that she has honored her father's experiences and his legacy in this way, and created this book. And as she said, kind of given him the life that he may have lived had he not made certain choices. But who knows where that life would have taken him also. So thank you to Cathy. Thank you to her father for writing this journal so that this book could come into existence. I I hope that you will join me next time. Of course, we are switching to contemporary fiction. It is a book by author Maggie Smith called Truth and Other Lies. So you'll want to tune in and find out, just what is behind that particular title. That will be on the next episode. And if you are a fan of this podcast, you know what I'm going to say. Like, subscribe, follow, do all those things to get every episode when they come out, but also leave a review if you haven't done so already. Seriously, all of these things help to get this podcast out, so I very much appreciate it when you are able to do any of these things. And then if you're so inclined, follow on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from you, hearing what you're reading, answering your questions, etc. So find me on social media and I will interact with you. Hope that you have a great weekend, and I will see you next time. I always, of course, hope that your weekend involves plenty of time for you to get yourself lost in a good book, or 2, or 10. Talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.